Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Phillips Collections Auditorium. For those of you that I have not met, my name is Andy Morse, and I'm the Executive Director of the Society of the Cincinnati and its educational division, the American Revolution Institute. We're delighted to have you here tonight for a very interesting program, but I do have a few things that I want to say in preparation for that as well. The Society has this American Revolution Institute of the Society is an important initiative that really is the future of what our educational products and programs will be. This organization has been around for almost 250 years, fast approaching that number. But our commitment to education goes back to the very founding of this organization, in that we were blessed with a future, a mission that said we needed to make sure that we were perpetuating the memory for why the American Revolution was fought. And that's a mission that we do today with great verve and great excitement, all from the headquarters of Anderson House, just a block away from here from this beautiful auditorium. The Society has maintained that mission because we have an amazing library, research library in Anderson House, as well as a beautiful museum and an array of educational programs and outreach activities that are second to none. We're very proud of them, and this is one of those events and opportunities to share some of that, not only with you all here, the audience that are with us tonight, but with an online audience that we're very grateful to has joined us as well this evening. We're very lucky to have a number of people from the Society here this weekend because this is an important meeting for us. Those people are far too numerous to mention, but I particularly want to draw your attention to a couple of folks. One in particular is our President General, our 40th President General, Frank Turner from Baltimore, Maryland, is with us tonight. Thank you very much, sir, for being with us. The president of our French Society, the Cincinnati, Lois de Colbert, is also with us tonight. And we're equally pleased to have a longtime friend and supporter of the Society and our American Revolution Institute. Dr. Denver Brunsman is the chairman of the history department from the George Washington University, just right down the street. And Dr. Brunsman is with us with his wife as well tonight. Thank you all for joining us. We are also particularly pleased because this is an opportunity for us to do something special, and it's thanks to a number of people. Number one, I want to make sure that I hasten to mention that this program is brought to you in part by a generous support from the Massachusetts Society of Cincinnati, as well as a generous bequest that came from Catesby Brooke Jones. Without that help, we couldn't make the events like this possible. But it's also possible thanks to Lois de Colbert, because he made some really interesting introductions for us this evening. We are hosting right now three great young people destined for a wonderful future. They are soon to graduate from what is France's equivalent of the United States Naval Academy. They go to the École Navale in France now. And these three cadets have been visiting in the United States over the last week. We had a chance to host them at Anderson House for a good bit of the day yesterday. And they also then went on to visit other great places around the Washington area, which includes Arlington National Cemetery and George Washington's Mount Vernon. These three cadets are sitting with us right over here as well, right where they should be, in the front row. And I want to tell you all that the service that you all are about to give to your country, and for that matter to the citizens of the world, is very important, and it's worthy of our applause. Thank you so much. The American Revolution Institute believes very deeply that the American Revolution is something that will always be relevant and should never be forgotten, particularly for the ideals of which that war was fought. Those basic ideals of freedom and liberty and equality and justice and natural and civil rights, they are as important today as they were in 1775. Yet in 1775, that was a moment, a pivotal moment in history, when people in the world had the opportunity to stop being subjects and be citizens. And we enjoy that here in the United States of America, as does the people of the Republic of France, and millions of other people all around this earth enjoy great freedoms and great opportunities because of what was fought for and won in the War of Independence. We wouldn't have been able to probably make that possible had it not been for what happened with beginnings of our nation's very earliest foreign alliances, foreign friendships, some of our most enduring friendships. And they start first and foremost with the Republic of France. Without France's support in the American Revolution, there's no doubt in my mind at all that the war would have ended. It might not have ended with the same story that it did. And we're very grateful for that, eternally grateful for that. And it's important that we continue to tell the story of the French alliance and how we keep alive that wonderful amity that France and the United States have been able to enjoy for fast approaching 250 years. We are profoundly grateful for that as a nation, and we forever should be. That's part of why tonight's story is also important as well, because one of the other people that Lois introduced us to was the person who is chaperoning these three wonderful young naval candidates. Not that they need a chaperone, of course, but they have one. And that gentleman is actually also our keynote speaker tonight. Jean-Marie Kowalski, Dr. Jean-Marie Kowalski, is a professor in not one, but two universities in France. He's been a longtime member of the faculty at the University of Sorbonne, Paris, and also at the École Navale, teaching officer candidates just like these young people here. He has written on many interesting topics throughout his career. He is an expert in military and ethics, and his work intersects with that. He's written on, one of his books is on the stories of Greco-Roman antiquity, but that's not why we're here tonight. That's not why he's here tonight. He's here tonight because he's just co-authored a very interesting book on Admiral de Grasse, obviously the man who was leading the French Navy, who had that seminal moment in history for us in September of 1781, when before very many people on Earth even knew what Yorktown was, the Battle of the Capes occurred right off of Virginia Beach, Virginia, and the French Navy made sure that Lord Cornwallis had no means of escape. This book that Dr. Kowalski has co-authored shows a number of interesting new insights in the story of Admiral de Grasse and why he is of timeless importance. If any of you have been to that beautiful promontory of land right off the coast of, right at Virginia Beach, Virginia, the coast in those days went a little bit further outward. It's probably 300 yards short of today of what it was in 1781. But at that very point, there's a beautiful statue. And that statue is of Admiral de Grasse, who always keeps vigil over that promontory land, looking out into the edge of the Atlantic Ocean, the Chesapeake Bay, where that battle was fought. We're going to hear some wonderful things from Dr. Kowalski tonight, and we appreciate his time and attention, not only for what he's doing to chaperone these good young people, but the opportunity to speak to us tonight. So, ladies and gentlemen, please give us a warm welcome for Dr. Jean-Marie Kowalski.
Ladies and gentlemen, first, thank you very much for your kind words and your warm welcome here in Washington. I would like to say thank you first to Lois de Colbert and the French Society of Cincinnati for their outstanding support in the organization of the visit of my cadets here in Washington, but also in Annapolis this week, because this actually strengthens the links between our navies and our countries. So thank you very much, actually. It's my pleasure to be here tonight with you, with such a distinguished audience, to give a lecture about Admiral de Grasse leadership and give, I hope so, new insights into the American Revolutionary War. I should say this is also new insights into French naval history with a very specific dimension, since probably you do not know, but September the 5th, the day the Battle of the Capes was fought, is now the French Navy Day since 2022. There was no French Navy Day before, and it's now our Navy Day. On that day, all sailors in France celebrate this victory, which contributes to build their professional identity. A few years ago, nobody knew Admiral de Grasse in France. Almost nobody knew. And very few people knew what happened then. So why did we choose to this particular date, and why did the CNO choose to have this date as our Navy Day? First of all, I must think that reading history helps us think about the future. We're not just celebrating, we're preparing the future. Second, some lessons learned are still highly relevant, and you hear about them in terms of tactical and strategic innovation, about decision-making at war, or training of crews, of fighting spirit. This also reminds all sailors at the end of summer, when people are back to business, what it means to be combat ready. We must remember that when de Grasse commanded this expedition, he had already commanded 7 warships before. He had participated in major operations in 1778, 1779, in 1780. And he was an old man who had lost his wife in 1773, got married 2 years later, but spent all his life at sea and accepted to go back to sea and to go back to war. But these operations are not only naval, they are joint operations, as both the Navy and the Army participated. In 1781, the French Army was 106 regiments. Think about it, 57 of them sent troops to participate in these operations. More than half the French Army participated in these operations. And these operations were also operations fought with France's allies, and especially the Americans. And this is especially important for us today. So that's why these joint operations with our allies, are so important now, and it's our Navy Day. I wanted just to focus on that in my introduction. So, as Andy Moss told, my talk will be based on brand new research Olivier Chaline and I conducted with a team of scholars from France, from UK, and the US. The first volume, you can see here, was published in June 2023, and it was dealing with naval operations. The second volume is now under the hands of Sorbonne University Press, and it will be published in September, October 2024. And the second volume will be questioning some ideas about sea power and proposes new ideas about resilience at sea. And I promise I will send you a copy here. So this research was initiated about 10 years ago when Olivier Chaline, who is an expert, and I would say the expert in modern history, naval warfare at the Sorbonne, he told me we should have a look at some documents nobody read at the National Archives in Paris. Some colleagues said, well, these are too technical. Don't read these documents, they are too technical. Others told us, well, there's such a quantity of information that it's impossible to tackle with the data they provide. So forget it, it's too huge. Other people told us that, well, these documents are, well, they're not reliable because they were written by officers and they probably had the intention to justify their deeds and their behavior. So you can't rely on what officers read. On my side, I did not have Olivier Chaline's expertise in early modern history, but I knew a little bit about the history of navigation, of naval warfare, naval operations, and I also had a good bunch of experts of navigation techniques, maps, GIS, hydrography, just in the offices close to mine at the Naval Academy. But I also had cadets who were interested in these documents as this is their history. So we started working and we collected these archives in Paris, in Kew, and in other places, and we gathered over 20,000 pages of archives, okay? And we started working, testing new methods based on operational sources. We tackled with limited batches of archives, and then we scaled up our research, and we came to realize that we could actually write something new, and a new history written from the quarterdeck. I mean, history at sea, not political history only, but history at sea. The experience of warfare at sea. So now, as it's getting actually very hot in Washington, it's much warmer than in Brittany. I hope that this lecture will let you feel a bit of sea spray coming coming from France and the Capes of Virginia. Got it. So I'm not going to dwell on this picture, but it's somehow representative of the way naval operations are usually represented. This picture comes from a major book made of you know about naval history and strategy by Alfred Sayer Mahan. We studied extensively the battles fought during those years because this is a raw material he could have access to. And when you look at this picture, all you can see are ships carefully lined up in a row, 24 on the French side, 19 on the British side, but you cannot figure out what it means to fight at sea with incomplete crews on the French side. From 10 to 30% of them were not on the ships on September the 5th. You cannot imagine what it means to fight with exhausted people on board, just like on the British ships, because the British ships had to face very bad weather conditions the night before. You cannot imagine what it means to sail with opposing currents and changing winds. Those who sail here on the Chesapeake Bay, probably some of you are sailors, know that there are strong tidal currents coming from the bay with the ebb and flow. And you know what it means to have substantially different expertise amongst your crews, because these ships you have represented here on the map were not just sailing boats. They were at the top of technology in 1781. And just think about it. All the ships were huge naval assets. They were huge naval assets, very hard to steer, that needed really expert crews. Just one picture you must have in mind. You know, probably all Notre Dame de Paris. Each mast of each of these ships was higher than Notre Dame de Paris. Okay? These were 70 meters high. Notre Dame is 69. And the mast of these ships was higher than the Charles de Gaulle carrier now. So these were cathedrals of sailors with experts on board, high technology at sea, and naval warfare. So let's go back to the sources and just forget 1 minute this picture. These documents are taken from the archives of the Ville de Paris, de Grasse's ship. The 1781 expedition is actually a very particular and unique one. It was the largest one France ever sent during the Ancien Régime. On the same day, March 22, 1781, Suffren sailed from Brest to the Indian Ocean, and de Grasse sailed to the West Indies with 20 ships of the line, 3 frigates, 4 cutters, and an additional force of 150 to 200 merchant ships for logistics, because you cannot fight such a war without logistics. What made it unique is, as you know, that it ended up in a major trial after de Grasse complained about the behavior of his subordinates at the Battle of the Sainte. Thanks to this trial, all the documents you can see and all the documents French officers had written were seized by courts in Lorient, while these documents were very often discarded by archivists. On the British side, archivists did not consider these documents as rubbish. They probably held naval history and naval documents in higher esteem. French and British regulations were very different in the late 18th century, as on the French ships, it was mandatory for all officers, whatever their rank and their functions were on board, to write daily their logbooks. All officers had to write their logbooks. And this provides us with a fascinating global view of naval operations, as midshipmen, such as these, would not have the same view of the situation as the captains or the admirals. Freedom of speech was the rule in these documents, as commanding officers could not control what could be considered as pieces of evidence in case of a trial. It was your personal interest to tell the truth, as your testimony could be compared with other officers' statements. Some indications were mandatory. The least they could say was the position of the ship at noon, the route sailed, some indications about the weather conditions. And in the French Navy, as you can see, there were no formal requirements. While in the British Navy, formal requirements were more important. What makes the difference is that there were only 2 logbooks on British ships, one by the captain, one by the master. But they gave basically the same indications. The position, the course, the winds had to be mentioned. And therefore, all this data we had in these 20,000 pages were all geo-referenced. Even if longitude was calculated from the Greenwich meridian in England and from the Paris one in France, 2 degrees 20 east of the former. So this raw material was highly challenging for us historians. First, this data was actually technical. We should have heard our colleagues, with many indications dealing with ships' maneuvers, sailing, both in French and in English. The total amount of data was absolutely amazing. And these were thousands of pieces, just imagine, of a huge puzzle. But we did not have the basic picture. So we had all these pieces and we had to put them together to figure out what it looked like. And unfortunately, these documents do not say everything. You cannot know everything from these documents because there are still many things we still do not know. And these are pictures from the Rade de Brest, which are quite important because that's the place where, well, Brest is here. And this entire bay is about 180 kilometers, square kilometers, which is quite big for us. The Chesapeake is about 12,000 square kilometers. It's much bigger. So these people sailed from what looked quite big for them, but was indeed very small. Things we do not know, such as the position of the ships when they left Brest. We do not know where they were on the bay. These are documents that show how usually the fleet was in Brest, but they do not say where they were actually when they left. So this is just to say that we cannot know everything for these documents, and historians must sometimes acknowledge they do not know everything. So. So in order to draw the big picture we did not have, this big picture of naval operations and draw conclusions from this scattered information we could collect, we had to implement a variety of techniques that helped us put into relation information coming from both sides, French and British, and understand if they were dealing with the same issues. So in that picture, you can visualize information extracted from navigation across the Atlantic from March 22 to April 28, with some irrelevant positions sometimes, and ships globally sailing south to reach the trade winds before heading to the West Indies, which means that they were quite confident with the Spanish here in Gibraltar. So this helped us point out some difficulties, and I will show you maps we draw in the book. This helps us point out some difficulties sailors then had to face up. And as you can see, some strange positions here and here. It looks as if de Grasse was sailing somewhere at the top of the Appalachian Mountains here. It looks as if also he sailed through the Keys in Florida and probably somewhere west of Palm Beach. Why? Well, we thought we were mistaken when we looked at this. First of all, the French were not familiar with navigation through the Panama Canal, but the secrecy of operations required bold options and taking a chance. So de Grasse had requested American pilots in March 1781. It's not their fault, let me say. They were transported on a frigate to Saint-Domingue and then sailed on the ships of the line. Nothing is said in French logbooks about the presence of American pilots and the role they actually played in navigation. But the discrepancies between the position calculated and what they could actually see is clearly mentioned in the logbooks. The French officers say, well, there's something strange. We should see land and we do not. We should be walking somewhere at the top of the mountains, but we're not. But this episode illustrates what modern navies call innovation. Even though the fleet was lost at sea, they kept on trying to do their best with experimental devices that they had on board, such as celestial clocks. In those days, these were very cloudy days, so they could not calculate their latitude. The celestial clocks did not work very properly on board, and one ship had these celestial clocks, the Saint-Esprit, so the Holy Spirit. So de Grasse asked the Holy Spirit to tell him where he was, but the Holy Spirit did not answer. One of the main consequences of this mistake is that at the end of August, Rodney was busy, but he asked at the beginning of August, he asked Hood to check if the French were in the bay. So Hood sailed to the Chesapeake. He arrived there, and well, the French were not. Well, but they were lost at sea. So the two fleets were very close to an encounter, as French and British logbooks, we came to realize, mentioned both strange sails the same day at the same hour in their logbooks. On August 26th at 3:30 p.m. on the Saint-Esprit and on the Ville de Paris, they sailed strange sails in the north. On board the Barfleur on August 28th, 3:30, the logbook says strange sails in the south. But it didn't try to get them because it was late in the afternoon. They know they could not fight at night. But the battle could have been fought on August the 28th. And history would have been different without this mistake. What strikes me here is that the ignorance of the Panama Canal current by the French helped them remain invisible from the British, who could not just imagine that their enemy was in fact lost at sea during a few days. Because the Panama current is 1 knot northeast per hour. So the French got 1 mile, nautical mile, northeast every hour. They were mistaken. They were not mistaken at all times. This is just a bit of kidding, you know? So one of the lessons learned of this history, and I told you this was joint history, but this was also American and French history. I mean, history of our allies, so I mean, also Spanish. This map shows that one of the lessons learned from this history is that if you want to know what it takes to win such strategic victories as the Capes or later Yorktown, you must widen your perspective. This map is adapted from Jonathan Dull's major work, The French Navy and American Independence. And I just wanted to show you this map to help you understand that the world is a stage of naval operations, even in the late 18th century. And that fighting at sea means fighting with allies by your side. The Battle of the Capes and operations in the West Indies before depend on the fleet remaining in Brest to prevent initiatives from the Channel Fleet. It also depends on the Spanish naval presence near Gibraltar to protect the convoys. They also depend on Barras in Newport, depend on Barras and especially his discipline to keep a British fleet in New York. This is therefore a global strategy at a wide scale, which has to take into account all the dimensions of war at sea. And boldness is actually one of the main features of de Grasse's leadership at sea, as he was not given the order, to sail north to America. What seems obvious now was not in 1781. When he made the decision to sail north, he was given the order to obey the Spanish. The minister told him, "You're not chief of the Spanish. You must work with them, and you're not the chief of the army." So he had to be a diplomat. And when he sailed north, it looked as if he was going all in at poker, playing poker, going all in. So, okay, I use all my ships right now. No ships, when he made this decision, would remain in the French West Indies that were then under Spanish protection. When he sailed north from the West Indies to the Chesapeake, he left absolutely no ships in the West Indies. But he knew that the season of hurricanes was approaching and that this would prevent the British from carrying out any initiative or retaliation. He had then the opportunity to create balance of force in this area. The surprise wasn't twofold for the British. De Grasse had made the decision to rally all his ships, even those that were not in very good condition. He also made the decision to leave merchant ships in the West Indies and to carry out his amphibious operations with his ships of the line, frigates, and corvettes. So these were overcrowded ships with men until they started landing on the bay, as the army was on board the ships. So when the French fleet anchored at the mouth of the bay late in August 1781, the situation wasn't quite different from sailing along the coast of Florida. The pilots were now really useful. And please let me say a few words about them. On July the 19th, 3 days after the army's arrival at Cap Français, de Grasse assigned the 7 North American pilots who had just arrived to some of his ships. So let me tell their names. Nathan Daggett went on the Ville de Paris, Mr. Cunningham on the Languedoc, Draper Thomas on the Auguste, Joseph Gardner on the Bourgogne, John Vaughton on the Magnanime, Nas Codrington on the Victoire, and Mr. Tissinghast on the Pluton. And de Grasse said that his intention is that they would be fed at the captain's table. They were pilots, but they had their lunch, the dinner with the captain. On July the 20th, Thomas Schmidt was assigned to the César, and a little later, on August the 3rd, 2 more pilots arrived. George Bates was assigned to the Saint-Esprit, and David John was assigned to the Andromaque. So these were the very first sailors, American sailors, sailing on French ships. Unfortunately, there were not enough pilots for all ships, while navigation is particularly difficult on this bay because of shallow waters. And de Grasse complains in his letters to George Washington about the lack of pilots to conduct safely operations there. 4 missions you can see on this map had to be carried out at the same time. The first one was here, blockading the bay. Blockading the bay to prevent Cornwallis from escaping, but prevents the British from coming in and support him. And this looked like anti-access area denial than blockading. The second mission was blockading the rivers because the British still had significant naval assets. The third one, which was the main one, was carrying out these amphibious operations on the river, and first on the James River, which was very bold amphibious operations, very far away from the ships of the line because it's about 35 nautical miles there. And last but not least, frigates remained at sea, both on the bay side and the ocean side, to gather intelligence about British naval operations there. So these were huge operations. This is as big as half Brittany. in France. So this is really huge for the late 18th century. De Grasse had to land troops, but he also had to save time before Barras could enter the bay and carry the heavy siege assets the infantry needed in Yorktown. So this picture shows an excerpt of a map by Thayer and Bennett. This is a British map, but used also by the French. And it shows how difficult it was to sail in this bay because think about the Ville de Paris. Ville de Paris has a total draft of over 7 meters. So you cannot sail in shallow waters with such ships. So we sailed a little bit from France to the West Indies and then to the bay, and now we're going to fight at sea. So this diagram shows some elements of what happens when they engage close and go to fight. And it shows some aspects of what forensic analysis of operational sources help us understand at a tactical level, and draw quite different conclusions from what is usually said about the misunderstanding between British flag officers. You will see some examples. All testimonies are relevant on both sides. The French and the British say exactly the same thing about what happened on that day, minute per minute, hour per hour. The logbooks on both sides emphasize de Grasse's ability to anticipate the variations of wind and to innovate at a tactical level, especially when both fleets come to fight and engage close. In his leadership, he lets Bougainville do his job, carry out operations. De Grasse always thinks about the next step of the battle. He's always the expert of what's going on afterwards. His orders are always about what's going on after, and everybody obeys in the fleet. So that's really a lesson for leadership at sea. So what does it say? At the beginning of the battle, one example from the Diadem on the French side and the London on the British side. Sailors come to see the same situation at the same time, but on the French side, this is an emergency. What happened on this morning is that one of the frigates that was in charge of gathering intelligence on the ocean side went aground. So the French could not see what's going on. And at 9, they came to realize that the British were arriving, and this was an emergency. They had to leave their mooring points very quickly because they could not fight from there. So this very first stage of the battle shows a very different picture from what happens in Mahan's story of this battle. In this emergency, de Grasse is actually highly innovative. And this picture shows you, with green arrows, the ships that were actually in the good squadron when they fought the battle. The red arrows show you the ships that were not in the good squadron. Why? Because in those navies, each ship was assigned to a specific position inside squadrons, number 1, 2, 3, and 4. The blue and white squadron, was the van in France, white was the center, and the blue the rear. The ones at the van were supposed to be the best, even if they were not all copper plated on the French side. Captains, commanding officers also knew that it would take a very long time to have all the ships in the right position within their own squadrons. That's why de Grasse's leadership proved to be highly innovative on this particular situation. And I'm talking about innovation, not improvisation. On that day, the order he gives is that the ships that were ready first would take the lead. If you're ready to fight, put to sea and fight first. Combat readiness was his priority more than the traditional organization of squadrons. This decision he had already tested on his arrival in the West Indies had decisive consequences. The best French ships made a brand new van with a new commander-in-chief, Bougainville, who was supposed to command the rear. And it's on this occasion, he was the very first, so he commanded the van. 3 ships out of 7 were not part of the van before. And in those conditions, a highly predictable defeat turned into a strategic victory. Once the ships had put to sail, the commanding officers had to define their priority because they could not carry out all their tasks on board. When you have 10% to 30% of your crew missing, you must make choices. And all of them made consistent choices. They said, your priority is not maneuvering. Your priority is fighting. So I want sailors behind their guns. And at the beginning of the battle, all guns were manned with sailors. The priority was to fight, man the guns, rather the masts, the yards, the sails. And when the time came for engagement, all the guns were available, even if many men were missing. On the British side, the Shrewsbury, that should have been the last ship of the rear, became the first ship of the van. And when Mr. d'Albert de Rion, commanding the Pluton, says the fight started at half a musket's range. Si, nous avons fait feu sur le premier vaisseau ennemi in French, fort près. Nous nous sommes battus à la demi-portée de fusil, half a musket's range. Because de Grasse made this choice to engage close with the British. When he engages fight, they fire some 400 rounds, almost 400 rounds during the battle, which is huge, within 2 hours, because the gunners could act very quickly as they were manned with all the men they needed then. What does the British commander say? He said, we were within muskets, but not in a good position, because as you saw my diagram at the very beginning, the French ships had anticipated the wind. And the British were not on a good position at this time. All these indications you can see are consistent. And that's why the battle caused much damage on the British ships, as their position was not very good at the beginning of the battle. And this document you can see here says that Mr. d'Albert de Rion thinks he was lucky, as he had only 1 man killed, 2 others died from the wounds, and 46 were wounded during the battle. And we were, with Olivier Chaline, quite surprised by the relatively low death toll. During all the battles, the number of casualties was constantly low. And even during the major ones, such as the Sainte, what we would call the butcher's share was not as important as we could imagine. Even after the capture of the Ville de Paris, it's quite difficult to assess the number of casualties. And one of the conclusions we could draw from reading these archives is that we must make a difference between battles of these big 2-deckers or 3-deckers and battles between frigates that were lightship and fought deadly battles. Men were actually well protected under the wooden armor of vessels, and they were not under the thin protection of the light hulls of frigates. So this is another example of the low level of casualties on board vessels. Only 2 people were killed on board the Marseillais, that was in a better position to fight, and fired over 750 rounds during the battle with Mr. Colbert de Canet. On the Diadem, have a look. The battle with the Princessa was engaged so close that the 2 ships were at pistol range. And they fired the guns at pistol range during the battle. On board this Diadem, you can read, that's in French, but I will explain. The ships were so close that the British ships' bowsprit almost tangled with the Diadem shrouds. Okay. Both ships almost crashed during the battle. They were so close. And they fired also almost 800 rounds at just a pistol range. So what is described sometimes as just a skirmish between the vans is not just a skirmish. The consequence on the Princessa, that was Drake's ship, are terrible. The yards, the masts, the shrouds, the stays are badly damaged, but the hull itself is not. And at the end of the day, only one ship had to be scuttled on the British side, the HMS Terrible. So this suggests us to reconsider the question of what we call a decisive battle. As in 1781, ships of the line were so well protected from bullets that destroying the enemy fleet was almost impossible. Winning a decisive battle meant something else for de Grasse. The Battle of the Capes was not just a skirmish. It was a limited tactical success that turned into a strategic victory, as this made it possible to win the battle in Yorktown. So we're going back to the mooring position, and be just a couple of minutes. I love this paper, which is what happened on October 21st, after the French carried on all these operations with the Americans, both on land and at sea. This document emphasized something very interesting. After September the 5th, nobody amongst the French crews was aware that something very important had happened. The ships remained at sea. They remained at battle stations all night long. They remained 1 week at sea, went back to the bay. They participated in all the operations. And on this document, you can read that at 6:30 on October the 21st, l'Iris and the Richemont put to sail to the York River. At 8, the Aigrette also put to sail to this river. At 1:30 p.m., we hoisted our stern and command flag, and we've put up our flags for the arrival of Mr. Washington. You see how it's written, W-A-G. Okay. Mr. Rochambeau is just an O. Okay. And Mr. Lafayette, who came for dinner on board. We made a party during the afternoon and fired several rounds. When they left, we fired 19 rounds and shouted 5 times, Vive le Roi. 19 rounds meant that they understood this man, Washington, was the future leader. And let's now travel a little bit south for my conclusion. In warm waters and sunny places, to show you another way to process the data we collected from the logbooks. And this helped us understand tactics on April 12, 1782, during the Battle of the Sainte, de Grasse lost. On these first diagrams, you can see the different stages of the battle, and we could say act, as this is a kind of tragedy, but this is not an artist's or a cartographer's view. This was rebuilt from data collected in the logbooks with, I told you, geo-referenced data and meteorological one. So we collected all the data from all ships, and we positioned all these data in maps. And we asked meteorologists to search their databases, the most approaching situation in their databases. So the situation that was very close from what happened and what we could see in our archives on April 12, 1782. So they got these, and once they had identified the most similar situation, they applied modern forecasting models, which included orographic data and helped us explain the phenomena described in the logbooks, especially the sudden changes in wind, the changes in wind directions that gave the opportunity to Rodney to break the line. Here, you can see. While de Grasse had given good orders, he was not obeyed in this occasion. So I will have many other things to say, but I know time is flying, I'm afraid. And it's now time for some questions. Thank you very much for your attention. So if the first question is too hard, ask the second.
What question? How many men were on the vessel?
Oh, that's a very good question. Actually, about a 74-gun ship was about 800 people on board. But if you think about it, these were very high ships with 70 meters high masts, but they were very short. They were about 53 to 55 meters long, which means that they are the size of a patrol boat now. And on the size of a patrol boat, we had 800 people. The Ville de Paris, which was a 3-decker, was approximately 1,200 sailors. So on the day they left Brest on March the 22nd, we had about 24,000 sailors leaving Brest the same day. So this was huge. When I told you this was most important operations we carried out in the Ancien Regime, this was actually the most important one. Yeah. And nobody ever had commanded such an operation before. So de Grasse accepted, and he knew this was huge.
Professor, I just want to say, first of all, my impression is this is extraordinarily interesting information. I almost wonder, how could it have been hidden for so long and you only found it now? Is there any, I think you alluded to the records were archived somewhere and they were too complicated. Nobody, I mean, most historians wouldn't say it's too hard to read it. I mean, wouldn't they want to explore it?
Well, actually, one historian had read some of these archives before, but he was more interested in the trial in Lorient than in operations. So nobody was actually really interested in operations because you had to gather different skills. You had to be historians, but also sailors. I must say I spent hours with Olivier Chaline and colleagues at the École Navale, naval officers or petty officers who were experts in navigation, just studying these archives. And we had to understand how they could use, their date reckoning techniques, for example, and to understand how they could calculate their position at sea. And so I remember spending hours with petty officers who were experts of some areas, and they said, "Well, I don't understand. I can't understand." And gradually we came to understand what was going on. And then we could build our database and compare all the testimonies and all the documents we had. So even when we built, these maps of battles, we know exactly the position of each ship as compared to the other ones. So this is why it's very technical. And we had to use these modern techniques. GIS did not exist for historians long ago.
Sea conditions during the battle, were the winds favorable? Did both fleets captains think they had good conditions? What was it like?
We had to rebuild this and to think about what happened. In order to understand the wind conditions, we also used the meteorological data the British had in New York to have a wider scale. And during the night before the battle, these were stormy conditions. There was thunder and storm on the bay. Here, late in August, at the beginning of September, it's sometimes these kind of conditions you're having here. And on the bay, these were light winds blowing from the northeast, typically stormy conditions. And during the battle, we do not know if de Grasse himself anticipated the situation or if these American pilots told the captains what would be going on. We do not know. Nobody says. Probably the pilots were useful. They were probably useful because they are always advisors to the captain on board the ships. But what we came to realize is that de Grasse always anticipated the wind shift. And that at the very beginning of the battle, he was in the good position. Half an hour before, when you read the British logbooks, the British captains do not understand his decision because he sails down the wind half an hour before the beginning of the battle. And he said, well, what's he doing? His line was good, and now it's not. But he anticipated what would happen. So the weather conditions were not very good for a battle. They were very shifty, and you had to anticipate.
Professor Kowalski, thank you very much for your fantastic presentation. It was on the technology you applied. What made Admiral de Grasse the leader of this operation? Why was he selected? What's his history to get there? Thank you.
He was number 14 on the list of flag officers. Number 14. This means that 13 other ones did not command. For different reasons. Some said, I'm sick. Because it was actually very difficult. Some of the others had political issues, such as Latouche-Tréville, not commanding officer of the Hermione, but his uncle. Others, such as Barras, could have commanded this operation, but he was already somewhere else. So they asked de Grasse, who did not want to command these operations. But he had the reputation of an extraordinary fighter. He was under command of d'Orvilliers in Ouessant, and everybody could come to realize the kind of officer he was at sea. And even Rodney was scared of him. He knew that he was, a kind of puncher. If you met de Grasse, you knew that he would fight close with heavy guns, good sailors, and this would be very bad time, So de Grasse had this reputation, and he was an officer of a navy that was defeated in 1763. And when you study this kind of people, you must always think about what they were when they were young. This kind of generation, Who was this young officer? And he was a young officer of a navy that was defeated. This means that during almost 20 years, he sailed, he fought, he trained, he thought about new tactics, innovation, how to make it possible to win against the British. And he did. With all these officers, we were outstanding officers on board these ships. Yeah. So we learned from our defeats too.
How old was de Grasse at this time, and what became of him after the American Revolution?
He didn't know the revolution because he died, but he was over 60. And after the Sainte, he was captured by the British. And I must say he was in a terrible mood. This kind of man is a fighter. He's not a politician. And actually, he did not appreciate his subordinates' behavior. I wouldn't say they were right or wrong, but he did not appreciate that. And he said, they abandoned me, and I will not pardon them. And the British were always very clever with that, understood that, well, there was something to do. We will send him back to France because he's such in a terrible mood. And that's what happened. He complained, there was a trial, and the king says, Mr. de Grasse, I will never ever talk to you. So please retire. So he spent the rest of his life at home, and he never commanded again a fleet.
How could de Grasse plan such an operation, financially speaking?
There's something typically French. When he left Brest, he knew that he would have no support. No support. Don't ask us more money. Don't ask for more ships. Don't ask for more troops. But this helped, strategic ambiguity, because the British believed that the French would send more troops. So they had their fleet in the channel waiting for more troops, but we had made the decision that we will not send more. And when he was in the West Indies, he didn't have the money to pay for this expedition to the Chesapeake. So he talked to the Spanish, and Galvez and Saavedra paid for it, more than 1 million. So the Spanish paid for this expedition. So he was also a diplomat, an outstanding diplomat.
Professor, thank you for your presentation. After the Saint, Baron Darros of Languedoc wrote a journal, which we have in our collection in our library, about why de Grasse was wrong to accuse him of abandoning the campaign. And I wondered if you had a comment on that journal.
So this explains many things. The officers in charge of the vessels just couldn't obey the orders. They could not. When you read the archives and when you're an historian, you cannot say, well, this man disobeyed. You cannot say he disobeyed. When you say disobeyed, it means that he had the intention to disobey. What we can read is that they didn't actually do what they were ordered to do. And de Grasse gave very relevant orders, but his subordinates just could not obey. It doesn't mean they did not want to obey, but they just could not, because the wind was so shifty, it was so bad just close to the coast that they could not obey him. So that's why they didn't understand each other. He sent signals, the officers said, we cannot. And the British could defeat them. It was easier for the British to maneuver that day for very technical reasons, because, well, just 1 minute, I'll tell you, the British ships were much better for maneuvering because of their hulls and their rudders. They were meant to maneuver easily in such wind conditions. First. And second, there was a convoy before that never arrived, Guichin's convoy. This convoy carried very important naval assets for supporting and maintaining the fleet. And the fleet was not in very good conditions, especially the hulls of the ships. They were dirty with seaweed, so they were slow. The French ships were slow on that day. So this, many things that led to this situation. And these officers did not disobey. They did not. They just could not obey the orders.
Thank you, Professor, very much for that wonderful delivery and illuminating moments with you. You have left us in a great mood as opposed to Admiral de Grasse, and we are very appreciative for that. Two small closing points of business that I want to mention, one of which actually is as much a point of personal privilege and pleasure as it is business. Many of you know that the nation of France, its greatest order of distinction, the highest honor that it can deliver to a military or civilian person, is its Legion of Honor. And occasionally, very occasionally, that privilege is also bestowed on those that are not French citizens. Normally it's reserved for only the French, and very few of those, I might add, as well. Well, I'm very pleased to tell you that just recently, our own 37th President General, Ross Gamble Perry, has been inducted into the French Légion d'honneur. And we could not be more proud of you, my friend. Thank you so much. Congratulations to you. Ross, for all Americans and even for these young cadets, you give us something to look forward to, we hope. Yes, sir. Also, one other quick point of business. I wish our friends online could join us, but those of you who are with us tonight can join us for a bit of celebration, cordial affection, conviviality, and dinner as well at Anderson House. Thank you for these members of the Society of Cincinnati that are here tonight, for the associates of the American Revolution Institute. We appreciate your time and attention, and we look forward to wishing you well again at one of these events very soon. Ladies and gentlemen, as George Washington might want to say, it is a free country and you are free to go. Thank you. We'll see you at Anderson House.